Red button?
Yeah. All right, so we're good. So first of all, we'd like to welcome Torah Anytime again to our class. Again, whoever is not familiar with it, I strongly, 100,000 times recommend you go and check it out. It is an amazing website. It has unbelievable amount of information there that anything that you ever wanted is on there. So we're going to continue today with the second class in the series of Reincarnation of Gilgulim, and we'll give, let's say, a very quick brief recap of what we did last, which was 2 weeks ago. So we spoke about that there is, we went through the scientific facts if there is such a thing as reincarnation. Now, scientifically, there's two ways I guess you could go about in proving something. Number one is if you see it and you could prove it, you could say, okay, listen, if I spill this color paint with this color paint, you see it's turning this color paint, right? That's very easy and observable. Now there's another one that you could do it by sort of, let's say you have somebody that went through something and you interview him and they give you an X amount of things that happened. Then you go to somebody else who had a very similar scenario, you interview that person also. And they give you a very similar situation that happened to them also. And you keep on doing that. So the more people that you interview, the more people that you have speaking about the same circumstance that happened to them, and it's related, and so there's obviously some truth into it. And that's how they did the study on reincarnation. So again, they can't start proving and saying, okay, this soul was here before, because we could see by this gamma radiation that this soul was here before, right? We're not there yet in technology. So, but they were able to show how things happen again and again and again, how people, non-religious, non-Jewish, completely secular, remembered their previous lives. They remembered certain aspects of what they went through. They remembered so much to the point that we even said there was one person that solved his own murder mystery, right? He got murdered 4 years ago, or something like that, 4 or 5 years ago. Nobody ever knew what happened to him, and he went and he found the murderer, he found his own body, and he found the murder weapon, right? So you can't make these things up, right? For some people, you cut up to a certain point, but after a while, there's only so much that you can make up. So the final results that we came with is there's a big, obviously there's always people that question this and in the scientific world, right? There's nobody that agrees on anything over there, right? So you go to Bet Midrash with a bunch of people learning Torah, there's also no one agreeing on anything. Everyone's always arguing, but it's a different type of argument. It's an argument for Torah is not about an ego. It's not about, well, what I said is right. Arguing about science, it's all about ego. It's like, what are you talking about? Well, I went to Harvard. Oh, I went to Yale. I went to Oxford. So I win, right? It's a very different argument. So in science, nobody ever agrees, right? Very few. There's obviously a few things that's they can't argue because it's just that's it. This is the information. You can't argue with it. But if it's something you could argue about it, there's arguments on it. So now, the final consensus was that there is such a thing as reincarnation, right? And you could do plenty of research on your own, and you'll see that it does in fact exist. Now, we also brought some psychiatrists, just to name a few, was Dr. Ian Stevenson, Dr. Jim Tucker, and Dr. Brian Weiss, was to name a few that we brought that support this, I don't want to say theory, but this, in their eyes, a theory of reincarnation. Okay, so now we'll begin with the new stuff. The new stuff is, first of all, we're going to have to discuss is what is the purpose of the whole reincarnation thing, which is reminding me, we're learning tonight is Le'ilu Nishmat Zoya Bat Berta Bolus. I hope I pronounced that right. There's a woman that passed away recently. So the question is what's the whole point of reincarnation? What is the purpose? If we were here already before, why do we have to come back again? So in general, we have to know that there's a rule that Jews usually come back as Jews. However, I'm not sure if I'll get to it in next class or the final class, but there is certain times where there's certain sins that a person can do that they could come back as a non-Jew. And they could even come back as an animal. And there's certain sins that we'll B'ezrat Hashem speak on when it comes to that part of it. But the idea is that generally Jews come back as Jews. So if you look at what's the real purpose, and if we take a step back, you realize that if you can have a good understanding on reincarnation, it answers almost any question that you have in life. Right? People have a question in life is how come this person is born to a wealthy family? How come this person is born to a poor family? How come this person is attractively like a dinosaur, and this person is a supermodel? It doesn't make any sense. And people always say, oh well, genetics. It doesn't work with genetics. There are people that look like they should produce a monkey, and they produce something amazing, and there are people that they look like they're both models, and they produce a monkey, right? In actions and in the look sometimes, right? So the idea is it doesn't always necessarily go by genetics, right? So the idea is, what's going on up here? Why are some people born differently than others? Some people are born very angry people, right? The idea is also you can see like little kids. Even little kids, you can tell a difference. You have 2 5-year-olds, right? And you give them each a some sort of I don't know, whatever it is you want, a bag of popcorn, right? And you give them each one bag each of popcorn. And then you go to one of them and says, could I have some? And the kid looks at you and says, yeah, sure. And he gives you one popcorn, one kernel, right? And then you say, no, could I have another one? And he says, yeah, no problem. He keeps on giving you more, right? Eventually, you keep on asking him. He just takes one for himself and he gives the bag to you, right? Then you go to the other kid and be like, oh, can I have a popcorn? He says, no, it's mine. You gave it to me. Finders keepers, whatever the rest of the thing goes. Right, it's mine. You gave it to me. And you said, but just one. I gave you the whole bag. Just give me one. He goes, no, absolutely not. He starts crying. He says, the man's trying to take away my popcorn, right? Even though he just gave it to him. Right, now, how can you tell the difference between them? These are 4-year-olds, right? They don't know yet anything about anything. They don't know anything about life. There's going to be a shortage of popcorn. For all he knows, he has 1,000 bags of popcorn in the back. How does a kid act like that? You see, some kids are really angry, right? Some kids will just sit on the floor and throw tantrums. Sometimes it's because the parents don't know how to bring them up and they just spoil them. Other times it's because they were just born that way. They are just born that way. So why does it happen? What's the reason that certain people are born a certain way? So the idea is that you're born in a way that helps you fix what you need to fix in this world. Now let me explain that. Everybody has missions in life, right? It might not be one mission. It's most likely multiple types of missions. But you have a purpose for being here. Now, if let's say your purpose is to, here's an easy one, it affects all girls, right? Let's say the purpose is to be modest, right? If let's say, and I think we spoke about this briefly at one point, if somebody is 550 pounds, 4 feet tall, and she has hair where even men don't have hair, right? Is that going to be a problem for a woman to be modest? She's going to go with a blanket over her. She'll just cut 2 eyes. She'll wear a burqa. Is that what it's called? The Muslim. So they're going to wear. It's not going to be a test for her. So rather, if her test in life is supposed to be modesty, which means as if in a previous life she wasn't modest, and God said, listen, you messed up, I'm going to give you another chance. So they'll send it to her with the want and the need to be modest. Like he'll give her a body that she should have something to show off, and she'll give him certain things. But the test is now you overcome it. Right? It's not going to be a test for the 500-pound woman to be modest because she doesn't want to show it off to anybody. And if she does, then she needs psychiatric help, right? As why she's doing that. And you look on the other side is, let's say somebody's purpose in life is to give a lot of charity, right? But he doesn't have a dime to his name, right? How can he fulfill his purpose? So let's say he has to build like shuls, and he has to build schools, and he has to donate to all these things, but he has no money, so that he's not going to be able to fulfill his purpose. The idea is very simple. The idea is that God gives you the tools that you need to succeed in life, or what you need to pass your test. Right? Everybody has their own test. So sometimes people see why is this person suffering, and why is this person having it easy? And the idea is that it depends what the purpose of the person's life is. This person has to suffer for whatever reason, and we'll soon see why people have to suffer. And this person does not. This person has a different test. This person has to help other people, whatever it is that they need to do. So people think of reincarnation. You can look at it as 2 ways. You can look at it as a punishment. It's sort of like game over, you lost, try again. Put another quarter and try again. Right? So God sends you back here again. You could look at it as a punishment. You could also look at it as opportunity. That's why there's in the Torah, in the Hebrew alphabet, there's something called numerical value, gematria. Right? So the numerical value of Gilgul, which in English is reincarnation, equals the same numerical value as chesed, which is also, they're both 72, which is also kindness, which means God gave you a chance to come back here. Right? God gave you a chance. It's basically like a do-over. It's like, here you go, you have a second chance in life. Right? Literally, you have a second chance in life, and the problem is what people usually do is instead of getting better, instead of helping themselves get better, they usually go worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, and then they come up with in the negative bounds instead of the positive bounds. So there's also something very interesting that and I believe we also we spoke about this briefly once also, Deja Vu, right? So there's a few understandings of Deja Vu. Deja Vu, generally, what people mean when they say that is they come into a certain situation, a certain scenario, and they're like, I remember doing this before. I remember you said that. I remember I said this, and you were over here. Everything played again, right? And you, for a split second or a few seconds, you're like, whoa, I saw this before, right? So one way and one possibility that it could be is it's possible that you two met in a previous life. Which means and then I'll explain it like this, it's easy to understand in the dating world. Sometimes, let's say you find yourself very attracted to somebody and you want to go out with this person, and you go out with that person, right? And it goes well, amazing for one date. And then the second date, it's like, oh no, it's definitely, I don't know what I was thinking. It was way off, right? And then, so what happened over there? The one possible explanation is that in a previous life, you guys had some sort of connection at some point. And you had that, your souls you don't recognize it, you don't remember it, right? Your emotions are playing something weird, but your souls had this sort of connection, and you felt something. And then when you got closer and you really boiled down to it, you realized, no, this was whatever. It was just like a sort of like a memory or something, if you could say it like that. The idea is that deja vu is very possible that everybody in this room was met before in a previous life, and God put you all back together again for a certain purpose, right? And that's also generally is that people can come back looking very similar to the way they did before. So they could come and they could see each other and they'd be like, wait a minute, something sounds familiar here. We've been through this before, right? And this is why the Rambam in Hilchot Tshuva, in the laws of repentance, he says, if let's say someone did a sin with a woman, and how does he go, and what is it when it's complete repentance? So the general rule of repentance is, number one is stop sinning. Number two is regret what you did. Not like, oh, remember that night at the club? Yeah, awesome, high five, right? That was a great time. That's not repentance. Repentance means, oh my God, how did I do this to God? I feel terrible. And number three is confess it before God. So stop doing it, regret what you did, and confess it before God. You don't have to, go to your school, go on the loudspeaker, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to announce, I've sinned before God. It's not like, you didn't even have to go to a rabbi unless you want to say something. If it's a serious sin, then you probably should, so he could direct you in the right way. But if it's a general, thing, you don't have to announce it to anybody, but you go only to God. Right? You go put yourself in a room quietly and you announce it to God. So let's say some guy, he went and he sinned with a woman. When is it? He did these 3 steps, and he did it. He really meant everything. When is it completely cleaned off his entire record? Is if he gets in that same situation, with the same woman, with the same desires that he has, and he overcomes it. It's sort of basically not putting yourself, because you're not allowed to put yourself in that position, but basically getting into that position somehow, and overcoming it, which means that you basically did the test again and you passed it. You know how let's say you have to you have a test, right? And you have 3 chances to pass it, right? So the first time you fail, right? And then they say, okay, I'm going to give you another chance. Chances are usually they're going to give you a different test. They're going to change it around. But imagine they give you the same exact test. Be like, okay, this is easy. I was here already before, right? The same idea is you will be put into a similar situation at some given point in time. If you pass that you know that your repentance is complete. So sometimes in this world, sometimes it doesn't happen in the same lifetime. Sometimes we get put back in this world to be put back in a similar test that we messed up in a previous lifetime, and then we have to overcome it. Once we overcome it, then our record gets clean. Make sense? Okay. So any questions so far? All right. So now there is also something. It was a very interesting story that happened. There was a doctor. It was a rabbi in Israel that was giving a class about medical ethics, and one of the doctors that were present in the class, he felt, he had something on his chest and he wanted to, tell the rabbi it. So he goes over to the rabbi after the class and he says, something's been bothering me. He says, I was on I think he was an oncologist or something, and there was someone on his floor he had no family members, he had no friends, no caregivers, no caretakers, nothing. It was just him alone. And he was literally, this poor guy was suffering, and they can't just pull the plug. Right, they need to have it signed. But if let's say they usually sign, let's say, do not resuscitate or do not intubate. They sign certain forms. The family could say, like, listen, if anything happens, I don't want you to try to bring this person back. Right? Halachically, it's an interesting question. Also, it's like, are you allowed to do that halachically? Right? So, but the idea is that this person had no one. This person had no one. So, can he? So the doctor felt bad. He's suffering every day. This guy's moaning in pain. Is that? So you know what? He pulled the plug without. As a doctor, he was able to whatever. He signed it off and he pulled the plug, and didn't bother him. That whole day went by without a problem. That night he goes into his bed. He falls asleep and he has a dream. In the dream, this man comes into him in the dream that he unplugged him. He's like, "What are you doing?" He says, "You took away 11 days of my life, and had I suffered those 11 more days, my soul would have been complete." And he says, "And now you took away. I still have suffering that I have to go through on my record." And it says, "And now you basically you really hurt me. You think you did something good for me. You really affected me." So the doctor said, he woke up, the dream like sweating, and he's like, "Oh, it was just a dream. Forget about it." He falls back asleep. The guy comes back again with the same dream. I think he came back 3 times. So the next day he went hear this class about this rabbi giving a class about medical ethics. So he says, let me ask it. Which is, by the way, is very interesting. If let's say I give a class about certain things, there's certain people that never come to the class, but they'll come to that thing. For example, I gave once a class about dreams and had like 3-4 people that they came to the class and never came before, never saw them before, never saw them afterwards. They came because they had questions about the dreams. It's like, oh my God, I just had a dream last night. That's usually how it starts. I just had a dream last night. I don't understand it. I saw the ad for the Shiur Torah for this class about dreams. I figured I have to come, right? And so he saw this, and he said, let me go to this rabbi. So the rabbi told him a few things that he could do to help this soul. And he also told him, he said, you have to publicize this, because people have to know. There's a reason why things happen to people. People don't understand. He says that if someone goes through suffering, there's a reason for it. God's not like, wakes up, you can't even compare this in a bad mood and be like, you know what? Rain for everybody today. Everybody's getting in. There's going to be 600,000 car accidents over here. And every single thing in life has an exact reason and purpose. Nothing happens by chance. Nothing. The fact that you're in here tonight is also nothing by chance. And you do have free will. Now, no, let's not, we can't, those things don't, they don't block each other off. Free will and purpose they both work very well hand in hand. So, the problem is usually that when do people do tshuva? When do people start repenting and coming to God 100%? Is usually when bad things happen. Usually, I've always found that almost 90% of the time, when I find out why somebody became, not always, thank you. Not always. Some people, they come back. I know one person, I actually had two people. What made them come back to religion was the numerical value that I was telling you before, the gematria. They saw some different things about numerical values, how it works in the Torah, and they were like, what? How is that even possible? How is it, like Torah codes, right? Equal mathematical skips in the Torah. And they were like, this is crazy. And from that, it changed their life, right? Everybody has something else that brings it. But most people, in generally, something bad happens, right? One is, there was somebody who passed away recently. I don't know what happened. I spoke to this person one time on the phone. And he asked me a question. They asked me a question as they were still in the Shiva stage. It was in the first 7 days after the parent passed away. And they wanted to know when they could shower before Shabbat and how that works. So I asked them, I said, do you keep Shabbat? So he's like, no. So, and he was saying Kaddish for basically, I think it was a father or mother. I don't recall what it was. So I told him, I'm like, all the Kaddish, obviously it's going to help. But it's going to help nothing as much as if you keep Shabbat. If you keep Shabbat and say Kaddish, it's going to be 10,000 million times more. As opposed to you have a wicked person that doesn't even keep Shabbat, doesn't do anything, but he comes to say Kaddish. What is he saying Kaddish really for? Kaddish is saying that I believe in God, I listen to, that his name should be great. Right? His name should be great and spread out to the entire world forever and ever. He says, what do you mean? You're saying things you don't believe. It's like a hypocrite. So, Baruch Hashem, he said that he's going to keep Shabbat, that first Shabbat. I don't know what ever happened since, but I hope that he kept the momentum. But it's a shame of what look, people that they only do tshuva when bad things happen. And the obvious question is why? Why wait till you get smacked, right? Why wait till you get smacked till you come with a let's say somebody is has some sort of pain in somewhere around their usually men are more like this. They would not go to the doctor until it cripples them in bed, right? Especially if they have bad insurance. They're like, no way, I don't need to spend $150 just to see the doctor. I know what it is, right? WebMD. Oh, yeah. See, I know what this is. It's nothing, right? And but the idea is, and then they get so unbearable, and then they have to go to the emergency room, and then they have to get an operation. It turns out a burst appendix, or whatever it is, and then there's a whole big slew of medical bills, right? And had they taken care of it originally, it would have been whatever. You would have paid $150. You would have taken some antibiotics, and it would have cleared out. The problem is in the spiritual world, is also the same thing. People wait until they get smacked and smacked and smacked and smacked, and they finally wake up. Right? Or sometimes they don't. Sometimes they still don't wake up. Right? Sometimes you could just smack a person. God keeps on giving you signs and signs and signs to be religious, be religious, be religious, be religious, be religious. And you're a matrix with all these things, all the God signs all over the place. Right? And it's a shame. And then at the end, this person comes up to heaven and God says, what happened to you? He says, how was I supposed to know? And God says, come. Show you all the things. And you're like, oh my God, how did I not read these signs? Right? How is it possible that people have to open their eyes and see what happens in their life? There's a reason for everything happening, right? And if something happens, there's a reason for it. You have to realize what the reason is. And I always say this is the easy example to do is let's say he's taking on his telephone, and they're using it somehow. It's more applicable to men, but you use the same idea. The idea they're playing it on their cell phone while they're going to the bathroom, and the cell phone falls into the toilet, right? So then they go and they take it out and they're like, oh man, you know why it fell in the toilet? Because I looked at things I wasn't supposed to look at in the cell phone. So what I usually say is that there's a process. Number one is, you probably did something that you shouldn't have done with the phone, and that's why you're getting punished specifically with the phone. Not necessarily, but very, very likely. But the number one is stop using your cell phone over a pool of water. That might be a good idea that it won't fall into that. Someone texts and drives and they get into accidents. You know what I did that? Because I was listening to non-Jewish music and I was driving like a maniac. Yes, and also you were texting, right? So you have to think on both ends of the thing. Everything that happens, you have to look at the physical thing of what happened. Why did I mess up, right? Oh, I didn't eat well, I didn't sleep enough, I got sick, whatever it is. Then you have to look at the spiritual thing. Is why did God do this to me? Why? Everything has a purpose in it. So the person has to be smart, and make sure that they repent before they come back to God, before they get forced with a twisted hand. There is Eov. If whoever's not familiar with the Tanakh, there was a person by the name of Eov, Job. And he went through ridiculous amount of sufferings. He was a person that was very, very high economically, financially, power. He had everything. He had 10 sons and wife, family, business, everything he had going for him. And one day, just everything turned around. He lost all his 10 sons died. Everything went bad for him. And not only that, also his money left him and his health left him, right? And what happened? Well, who was it? So the Kabbalists say that this person was a reincarnation of Avraham Avinu's father, Terach. Terach used to go and sell idols. Abraham's our forefather. His father used to sell idols. He was an idol merchant, right? That was his business, right? How's your day going? Thank the gods, right? Bless gods, right? Because he did all the idols. So now what happens is if let's say a person does a certain amount of sins, sometimes tshuva, repentance, wipes it all away. Sometimes it doesn't. Repentance is not enough. You have to go through suffering, right? If you have to go through suffering, and in order to have it completely repentant, I'll give you some examples. There's 36 such sins, and maybe one day we'll give a class on those 36. So, but just a brief, I'll give you, let's say, just 3. Number 1 is homosexuality. Number 2 is eating chametz on Pesach, eating bread on Passover. If someone does these things and then they go and they repent, I can't believe I did that. And you do the full repentance, you cry to God, you confess, you regret, you stop doing it. That's all nice and dandy and it's great, but it's still pending. It's pending until you go through suffering. Once you go through suffering, then it gets cleaned. And the last thing that I wanted to mention is one of these sins is not keeping Shabbat. Not keeping Shabbat is one of the sins that if you don't keep Shabbat, and then you decide to keep it at some point in time, whether you keep it or not, at the end of the day, you're still getting suffering. The suffering is, for somebody who doesn't keep Shabbat, the end of them is going to be suffering. They're going to have to go through suffering in order to get repent. And I always say, for what? For what? People have a hard time keeping Shabbat, that their family doesn't keep it, I understand that. But what do they end up doing? Using their phone? Watching TV? Go to sleep for 25 hours, right? And that's it. You're good, right? For women, it's even easier, right? But to keep Shabbat, all you have to do, number 1, the first step is what you do is don't break it. Do not break Shabbat. It's not worth it. It's not worth it to go in the car and to drive something where you're going to go shopping. You're going to find the dress 50% off. For what? For some suffering? You know what suffering is? Suffering is not fun, right? I don't have to, imagine if you come up to heaven after 120 and something bad, let's say God, not you, somebody else didn't keep Shabbat. And they went and they found this amazing deal. They went to Nordstrom and they found this crazy deal, 95% off of something that they needed to buy, right? And they saved $1,500 and they feel amazing. And then things happen in the course of their life, and 3 years later, they get into, God forbid, they get into a terrible accident. Terrible accident, they're in a cast, and they're, for 6 months, they're sitting in bed, they're losing money, everything is going bad. Comes up after 120, and God says, you know why that happened? Because you went on Shabbat and you bought a dress. Right? You did all these things, you brought suffering upon yourself. You can never, there's one thing that you always should learn, is that you can never gain by not listening to God. And if you listen to God, you can never lose. You can never, ever lose by listening to God. That's one thing that you should always know. Okay, but I digress. And there's also, to understand this is that you see, let's say kids, unfortunately, that are born mentally disabled, right? Be like, oh, what happened? What a shame. It's so sad. It's such a shame. If people have to understand, first of all, people that are born mentally disabled, their souls are on a much higher level than anybody else. There were certain rabbis that if somebody mentally disabled walked into the room, they would stand up. Because that means that the soul has very little left to fix. Because they don't have so much free will. Right? They don't have so much free will, so then they don't have much that they need to fix. They have to be here for a certain period of time, and we'll soon see. I don't know if we'll get it today, but there's certain stories that I have about that. They're here for a certain amount of time, and then they pass away. They usually don't live that long, and they go to Gan Eden. They go to heaven. Their thing is clean. But let's say you look at it the other way. Look at somebody who's born. There's something called in Torah mamzel. Mamzel is if, let's say, a woman is married to a man, and she goes and cheats on her husband and sleeps with another man. And from that union and the affair that they had, she became pregnant. That child is called a mamzel. Now, a mamzel is not allowed to marry. If someone came from that type of union, they're not allowed to marry anybody. They're not allowed to marry any Jew, only somebody like that. Only somebody that was in that same category, a mamzel. Right? So now the obvious question is that what happened why is this little kid getting punished? What did this kid ever do? It's his parents' fault. Why are you punishing the kid? Right? It's a good question, no? So the reason is what do you think? It was just, the soul, she got pregnant. So like, oh, quickly, we're running back. Soul number 1,582, come on, go in. It doesn't work that way. There's a reason why that soul specifically went in there, right? It's very possible that in a previous lifetime he cheated on his wife, or it was a girl and she cheated on her husband, and that his punishment is that he's going to be born in that scenario. Nothing happens by chance. Nothing at all, not even one iota. You see a leaf on the floor, there's a reason for why that leaf is there. Everything happens for a purpose. So the idea is that we don't know the full picture. We never know a full picture. You see that, an easy example to understand is, let's say somebody has never been to a hospital before, right? He lives in a third world country, never been to any medical facility. He walks in the first time he lands in America. They take him on a plane. He's mesmerized by the fact that there's a bird flying in the sky, and he's on this bird. And he goes into these things as magic. He goes there. The first thing he lands, they take him to an operating room, right before he sees anything. He takes him into the operating room, and they're like, you see, there's a guy that this guy's very sick, and the doctors are saving him. I want to show you how they're saving him. So he says, fine. They walk into the room, and they see a bunch of people with masks, right? They look like ninjas, gloves, things, right? Blood everywhere, right? This guy's stomach and guts are all over the place. I don't know if you ever seen a surgery. I've seen a surgery, right? They could literally they burn the skin off. They move around the stomach inside. They take out what they need to take out, and then they put everything back together again. It's how they play that game with the. What's that called? Doctor Operation, right? It's a very similar idea, right? There's a reason why they got that, right? So, you see this guy walks in from a third world country, walks in, and he's like, these guys are murderers. What are they doing? Look at him. They're killing him, right? They're taking out his insides. And the guy's like, they had to hold him back because he was going to go and take all the knives and start killing all the people that are the doctors over there. And it's like, you walked in the middle of the scene. You don't know what's going on. This guy has a cancerous tumor inside over there. If they don't take it out right now, he is going to die. So there's many people that come in the middle of life and say, why God, why is this happening? Why is this happening to this person? Why is this happening to this person? Why is this happening to me? Right? And the reason is you're coming in the middle of a movie, right? If you walk into a movie and you see somebody like beating up an old grandmother, right? Throwing off a chair. Like, oh, that guy's such a wicked person, right? But less you know is that this grandmother is really the one who's in charge behind North Korea, and she's the one who's sending missiles everywhere, And they're saving the world by throwing her off the chair for whatever reason is, right? When somebody walks in the middle of a scene, you don't know what's going on. The idea is, and everybody is in the middle of a scene right now. You're in the middle of a movie right now, the movie of your life. It could be in a period, you could have been here 5 times before, right? And you're here for a certain purpose. So you don't know why things are happening, but it's happening for a reason, right? You stick around to the end, you'll see the reason, right? The important thing is to know how to play your role. Make sure you play your role right. So I want to tell you this amazing story that I read many years ago. There was this is a story about the Baal Shem Tov. Whoever doesn't know the Baal Shem Tov was the founder of the Hasidic movement. He lived in Ukraine from, I think he died the year 1760. So we're talking, quite some time ago. And he was an unbelievably high Kabbalist, of the Kabbalah, that we don't, like he was the type of person, we'll soon see for some stories, that he was able to see where your previous soul was. Someone like on the level of the Arizal. Arizal was also a very big Kabbalist, lived about 500 years ago in Israel. He would be able to look at you and tell you, you are in this previous lifetime, you are this person, and this is the sin that you did, and this is what you have to do to fix it, right? Like, gave you like a whole map out. So now this was a very similar rabbi, that also did similar, miracles. Obviously not to that caliber, but he was an extremely holy man. So there was once a person that a husband and wife that didn't have any children. So they go over to, the wife goes over to her husband and says, listen, there's a big rabbi called the Baal Shem Tov. Says, go over to him and ask him for a blessing. And he says, fine, can never hurt, right? Going out. Usually what happens if people go to a rabbi? Last resort, right? People go out, they'll first try the doctors, they'll first try everything else, and then finally they'll go to like a rabbi. And then finally they'll see what okay, fine. Nothing else helps. Let's see what the rabbi says, right? But the idea is, and these people were holy people, right? They didn't wait till the end, right? They saw they couldn't have a child, they went right away to the rabbi. So the rabbi said, he looks at this, this couple, and he looks at, and he says, are you strong enough? So they thought physically, like, yeah, why not? I mean, we're older than, we tried for children for a few years, we didn't have it, but we're physically strong enough. And they were like, yeah, we're strong enough. Says, okay, there's a soul that's waiting to come down to this world, and I give you a blessing that you should be blessed with a child. 9 months later, they had a baby boy. Right? They had a baby boy, and they showered. If somebody doesn't have a child for a long time, the amount of love that they shower is, you have like these teen moms, right? Where they leave their kids, who knows where, in the dumpster, But you have these, and then you have these people who didn't have any children for so many years. They cherish that. The idea is that learn to cherish something before you have to go and fight for it, and you can't find it, right? You have to learn how to appreciate something before you lose it, right? What is that? Someone doesn't, you don't appreciate what you have until you lost it. Mm-hmm. Whatever the saying goes. So I really got to practice my sayings. Okay, so they go over to this baby, and they just shower it with love. And this baby has an unbelievable upbringing. So after 3 years go by, and the baby gets his first haircut, and they put the first tzitzit on him. Shortly after he got that, he died. Like unexpectedly, like just passed away. So the parents were heartbroken. They were like, "What's going on over here?" It's like after so many years. So they go back to the rabbi and be like, after so many years we didn't have a child, and you give us a child that doesn't even last for. I mean, God gave us a child that doesn't even last for 3 years. What's going on? So the rabbi said, I asked you if you are strong enough. I didn't mean physically. I meant emotionally strong enough. And the rabbi says, let me explain to you who this child was that you had. It says it was many years ago. There was a person by the name of Vladimir Potocki from Poland, and he grew up in a very wealthy, noble Polish nobleman, I guess you could say, right? A lot of money, and he was a very, very bright kid. So the father said, you know what? I think he was a duke. The father said, listen, I'm going to hire all the, best educators out there, and I'm going to teach him all the best information that he could possibly get to know. So they hired him the best, and he learned Latin, he learned Greek, he learned mathematics, he learned all the various science, and he learned also Hebrew. He learned Hebrew, and he learned the Old Testament, because that was also, that's also a very important thing even in the secular, non-Jewish world. It's still something that they study. So it just so happens to be that the person that he wanted to take to teach his son the Hebrew language was he was known very far and wide for his he's a very wise man, a very great teacher, and nobody knew that he was Jewish. He didn't dress like a Jew because there was a lot of anti-Semitism going around over there. So he kept on going over to this teacher and says, I want you to teach my son. And the guy kept on declining and says, listen, I can't, it's too much. What was the reason he didn't want to? He says, if you teach it, it's not like, you send the son to your school and you teach him and you hear some homework assignment. Back then, if you wanted to teach the duke's son, you go and you live in the palace for X amount of time and you teach him, and that's your lodging. And he says, listen, if I go over there, how am I going to be able to pray? How am I going to be able to do all the things that I need to do as a religious Jew? So he said, he kept on declining. After it came to a certain point where he couldn't decline anymore. Basically, the Duke said he didn't give him a chance. He says, you're coming to teach my son. So he says, fine, I'll come to teach your son on one condition. And the condition is that you have to allow me every day in one 24-hour period for 1 hour. I get the room to myself. Nobody can bother me, not even you. The Duke said, fine, a weird request, but you got it. And he started teaching this kid. And this kid grasped everything. All the knowledge that he gave out like a sponge, he soaked it. And he really loved it, and they got a really good chemistry between the kid, the teacher, and the student. And they told this student always wondered why his favorite teacher, this Hebrew teacher, why is he always locking himself up in the room? And 2-3 years went by, and the kid couldn't hold himself anymore. He kept on asking him. He says, "What are you doing in the room?" So he says, "What's the difference? What I do? Whatever. I do my own thing for an hour. I need some peace and quiet without anybody." He gave some excuses to push him off. The kid was a smart kid. He says, "No, there's something going on over here." So one day when he's about to go in, the kid gets a little bit earlier to the room and he hides under his bed, and he sees his teacher go in. And his teacher comes in, and he locks the door, sees nobody's in the room, and then he takes out from a shelf this little bag. He takes out the bag and starts putting on tefillin. He starts putting on talit, and he starts praying and chanting in Hebrew. And, he's getting really into it, and he's very, he's like in a different world at this point. And this kid is looking and he's like mesmerized, like, wow, what is he doing? What is all this stuff that he's doing? I've never seen this before. So he looks from under the bed, this kid, and he says, what are you, he's like, what are you doing? And the teacher just like jumps, and he turns around, there's no one there. He's like, is somebody in here? And the kid rolls out from under the bed. He's like, yeah. What are you? It's like, what is this? What is all this? What is the strings that you have on one of the boxes that you have all over you? So he says, how did you get in this room? This room is only supposed to be for me for 1 hour a day. And so he kept on, some certain rich kids, you can't sort of talk them down. When they want to know something, they keep on asking it, right? They have confidence, right? So the guy says, forget about that right now. He says, I want to know more about what you're doing. So he's like, it doesn't really matter. And he kept on pushing him off. The kid wouldn't take it. He says, no, I want to know exactly what you're doing. So he tells him, okay, listen, he says, I'm a religious Jew. And, and this is my prayer service that I do for, once a day I pray to God. This is the time that I'm able to have alone that me and your father came to understanding. So the kid's eyes light up, and he says, teach me also how to pray. I want to wear the boxes. Teach me also how to pray. And the teacher's like, it's like, listen, it's not really, it's better for you. You don't need to pray. You're not Jewish. You just be a righteous Gentile, serve one God, and you're good. And the kid wouldn't take no for an answer. He's like, no. He's like, put it out. He's like, listen, if I put this, if your father finds out that I'm Jewish and I'm putting Jewish prayers stuff on you, he'll have me killed. And the kid says, listen, if you're not going to start putting it on me right now, he said, I'm going to start screaming for the guards, and I'm going to tell them that you're not going to last anyways. So the guy, he put him in the corner. He says, that's fine. He starts putting on the tefillin on this non-Jewish kid. Then this non-Jewish kid puts on the tefillin, and his face just like lights up. This kid had a Jewish soul at one point, and he's like, tell me more. I want to know everything there is to know about this. So, he started basically teaching him a little bit more about the Jewish prayers, about the Jewish philosophy. Besides the Hebrew language, now he was teaching about the Torah and all these different types of things. And his idea was that if, let's say, the Duke finds out about this, he'll say, listen, this is just some part of how I explain the Hebrew, and he's going to learn a very strong understanding in it. So he had a good way out in case the Duke finds out. After a certain amount of time, the kid, kept on praying with his teacher, kept on doing everything with his teacher, and then finally the kid said, he says, listen, I want to convert. He's like, I want to be a Jew. And he kept on pushing him off. There's no reason for you to be a Jew. You're going to be a Jew. You're going to lose all your money. He says, your father's going to disown you. So the kid says, you're not going to push me away. I'm going to be a Jew. So they went over to the local rabbi. The rabbi said, listen, you cannot convert over here. He says, if you convert over here, he says, your Duke is going to, first of all, your father is going to kill me. He's going to kill that guy. And he's going to start causing all problems for all the Jewish people. He says, you have to leave the country if you want to convert. So this young kid, he says, you know what, fine. And he decided that he's going to start moving to Israel. He's going to, now back then you don't take a plane ride. Right? He had to take, carriages and this and that and going from ships until he made it to Israel. And the teacher says, listen, if he's leaving, I got to make sure I run away also, because now my head is on the table. The kid wrote a little note to his parents and left without saying goodbye. And he goes and he travels to Israel to go through a conversion. Now, when the father found out about this, the father was furious. He hated Jews so much, he couldn't believe it. What's going on? Why is this kid? So he hired private investigators. He sent him out through the entire world where he thought his son would be. And he said, listen, I want you to go and find him and bring him back. And he said, there's one thing that you're going to be able to know if it's him, is if he was always very fond of lace work. He says, if you go and you see it, that's where you have to look, because it's very likely that he's going to get into that business. So he says, I know my son, I know he likes this, go look in those areas. So for years they're trying to figure out, to track this his son back, and they weren't successful. Many, many years go by, and they're in Israel. One of the investigators in Israel, and is still, full salary by the father for years trying to get his son back. And he's in this lace district, I guess you call it, and he sees somebody that fits the description. He comes closer and he sees that he really feels that this one it is, right? So he quickly grabs him, and whatever chloroform, whatever they used back then in those days, he took him with force and he tied him up and he brought him back to his father in Poland. And he brings him to the father in Poland, and the father says, he says, what's going on over here? What are you running away and you're becoming a Jew? He says, come back and convert back to Christianity. And the kid said, I'm not doing it. He says, you're going to do it. If you don't do it, I'm signing you out of my will. You're not going to get a penny. He says, I don't need anything. I don't need your money. He says, I got Israel, I got Shabbat, I got the Western Wall. He says, I don't need all your money. I don't want it. Keep it. And the father is like, he says, he's not going to take no for an answer. He says, no, you're going to come. He calls the priest over. He says, you do something with this one, right? So the priest starts telling him, listen, if you're not going to convert, we're going to burn you at the stake. He says, you're a heretic, right? In the Christian world, how do you convert out of Christianity to Judaism nonetheless? So he says, if you don't convert back to Christianity, you are going to be burned at the stake. So the kid said, you're going to be, excellent, burn me at the stake. You're going to do me a favor. There's so many sins I did when I was here as a non-Jew, and the things that I shouldn't have done. He says, and I tried to fast, I tried to repent, but he says, but now you're going to do me a favor. Now whatever you're going to do is going to cleanse me for sure. So, the father, was furious. So he calls the mother and he says, listen, talk some sense with him. And the mother starts begging him and he says, listen, my dear child, please, I don't want you to die. Just pretend to convert back to Christianity and whatever. Just, I don't want you burned on the stake. So the kid was, he's not a kid anymore. He's an older man with a long beard. He says, absolutely not. He says, I'm a Jew now, and if you want, you can kill me as a Jew. I will never be Christian again. And they went, and the parents went, and they killed him. They burned him at the stake, which just shows you, look at what a parent does for their child when they don't go according to the way. They killed their own child because they didn't follow in their path that they wanted. Which just so evidently, it's very, I've heard very, in the past few days, stories also where the kids killed their parents spiritually. And to explain that is, there are people that pass away, right? and we started off with saying with Kaddish and Shabbat, right? There are people that the kids refuse to say Kaddish for their parents. They refuse. They'll say, no, I'm not going to the synagogue, and I'm not saying Kaddish for the parents. And I'm like, what do you have to lose? Even if let's say it doesn't exist. Let's say religion doesn't exist. 1% chance it exists? So 1% chance you're not going to help your parents out? So what is the reason that they refuse? Why is the reason that people refuse? And I know a few people like that. Someone that passed away recently and someone passed away about 2 years ago, right? And they refused. And not only it was a husband. And the wife said, it says, you're not going to say Kaddish. He told the children, don't say Kaddish on your father. Right? This is what a woman, so what brings a person to do that? And the answer is, it's not by not sure if God exists or not. If they go and they start saying Kaddish, that means that there's a God up there. They're admitting to the fact that there's a God up there. If there's a God up there, then I'm living my life the wrong way. He says, I'm not willing to change. He says, I don't want to change. I'm rather my husband or whatever it is suffer because I'm not changing. Right? And people go through so much, the parents, if only, how many times the parents came to the kids in the dreams and says, please say Kaddish for me. Right? Why, the obvious question is, why are they waiting for the parent to come to the dream? Why did they say it until now? So they refuse to change. Most people, even people that are atheists, still have this doubt that possibly that there's God there. I spoke to a few atheists, right? One of them, I was like, he doesn't believe that the God exists. So I'm like, okay, fine. I said, 5% chance that there's possibly that a God exists? Thinks for a minute, it's like 5%, yeah. And then I brought him all the way up to 50%. And he was at 50%, yeah, I would say about 50%. So what I was really telling him, and I told him to this, and I explained to him, like, you have your 2 cups, right? I don't want to waste a cup, but imagine 2 cups filled with water. One is poison, and one is just regular water. Are you going to go and drink you're very, very thirsty. Are you going to go and take a chance? You're like, what are you, crazy? He's like, I'll never drink the poison. He says, but you're willing to take a chance, risk your entire afterlife on a 50% chance that maybe God doesn't exist, right? Well, the real reason, if people pretend that they're atheists, people pretend that they don't believe in God, people pretend that they're all these things, the real reason, you want to know the real reason why, is they don't want to change. And they're going to give every excuse and rationale that's going to make them feel comfortable with not changing. Anybody who has a head on their shoulder could look in the world and see that a God exists. Going back to the story, so Vladimir's soul went up to heaven. And God said, welcome, you got the highest level of paradise. You're going, you did everything for it, you did everything right. However, there's one thing that you have a choice. He says, since you brought up in a non-Jewish home, and you are nursed by a non-Jewish woman, sung non-Jewish lullabies as a baby, he says, you don't have to go back to this world. He says, you're going to get, but if you want to get an extra level, you want to get a little bit more, he says you have to come back in this world, be born to a Jewish family, get nursed by a Jewish woman, and then I'm going to take you right after that, and you get into a much higher place. So this holy soul, this Vladimir, he says, absolutely, send me back down. Says, and this is Baal Shem Tov was going to his 2 parents, and says that soul went into your child. So, and he says that's why he lived for 3 years, and then he died. And then he went back. He says, you did a great kindness, a great chesed for the soul. So the mother, hearing the story, she's like, I really feel good and happy about this all, but I still lost a child. So the rabbi said, he says, because you did such a kindness for this holy soul, you're going to be blessed with another child. And the story goes on, and that this child ended up becoming a huge, huge rabbi by the name of Rabbi Aaron of Karlin. Right? So the story goes, it was just like an unbelievable, Hasidic master and a rabbi of unbelievable growth. We'll probably say stories about him in this topic as well. So now the obvious thing is that we learn from the story is like you see this kid, you see a 3-year-old kid that dies, unfortunately. But there's a reason for it. There's a reason for everything that happens. Sometimes it's hard. It's hard to understand it, and it's hard to realize that there is someone behind it and there's a reason for it. But if you take step number 1, which realizes there's a higher power over there, there's a God that's orchestrating everything, then there's a reason you're going to feel better. You're going to have your life is going to go smoother, right? This is also the secret of emunah. If you have faith in God, your life is going to be better. Your life is going to be happier. You're going to be stress-free. Everything in life is going to be better. That's why if you want, let's say if somebody's interested in reading a book about changing their life, people go and they take all these New York Times bestseller on, whatever it is, 7 steps on how to improve your marriage or things like that, right? You want the number 1 thing that will improve everything in your life, you buy a book about emunah, about faith, right? And if you don't know, I'll tell you one amazing book, The Garden of Faith. The Garden of Faith, everybody should own. Not only should they own, they should memorize it, right? If you read that book, your life is never going to be the same. But reading it is different than internalizing it. You have to internalize it. It's very, very important. So now, the obvious question that we have to deal with is, how come if we just went and explained that there's a reason for everything that happens, and not only is there a reason that everything that happens, but we're here for a certain task. Now the obvious question is, why don't we know it? Why doesn't God, when we come in, come with a little envelope and a list of things and be like, this are the things that you need to work on, right? So you could be like, okay, just a check, this I'll push for later, and this how come we don't know what we need to work on? So, in a way, if you think about it, what would be better? To know what you need to work on, or not to know what you need to work on?
Not to know.
Why would you say not to know?
Because if you knew, there would be no tests, and you wouldn't...
No, you could still have a test. Yeah, if I tell you I'm testing you about math, and I give you math problems, so I could...
You wouldn't have as much value to what you accomplish.
I hear. But at the end of the day, if you're we're going to be finished like in 5 minutes, is that good? Okay. So... okay. So you could come for the class also. So if somebody there's a very, very big pro side for not knowing what you need to fix, and the reason is that let's say let's use suffering as an example. Let's say someone did a sin, right? And God said, okay, now I have to wake you up. So He gave you a little smack, right? But now let's say someone did 10 sins. Now they will need 10 smacks. But imagine we would know. Imagine, let's say somebody gets in the fender bender and be like, okay, you know why this is this? Because you talked bad about another one of your friends, and that's why it happened, right? So okay, fine, I'll fix that, and you know that. But let's say someone had 10 problems, and now they're going to need 10 different things. That's a lot of smacks. But imagine you don't know. Imagine you get a fender bender and you'd be like, why did this happen? Like, why did God do this to me? So maybe it was because I talked bad, or maybe it was because I was modest. Maybe it was because this. Maybe it was because this. So God sent you one smack and you fix 10 things. So it's the best thing is that you don't know. So right now we don't know what we have to do. We generally, in a very general sense, we don't know why we came back to this world for. We don't know the real reason. But we'll soon see. What God willing, if in the few minutes I have, I'll see what I can do. But we'll continue it next week. Is there's ways to figure out on what it is that you need to work on. So there was once a person by the name of Shmulik. Shmulik is like let's call him Sam, right? Give him an English name, so easier to pronounce also. There's a guy by the name of Sam who had very, very hard times in business. Anything, he used to complain to his wife. He says, if I sell candles, the sun wouldn't set, right? If I go and sell like burial stuff, no one's going to die, right? Everything that he tried was not successful. And he's like, oh, what's going on? So she goes and says, this story happened also with the same rabbi as the last story, or the Baal Shem Tov. So she says, listen, go to the Baal Shem Tov, go to this rabbi and ask him why you have such a hard time in business. She says, fine. He goes over to this rabbi, and he tells the rabbi that his problem. The rabbi sets up like 2 candles, opens up the Zohar, very Kabbalistic work, and starts concentrating on learning for like a few minutes. And he's sitting over there, and suddenly he sees the rabbi closing his eyes and concentrating for a long time. Suddenly he opens his eyes and he tells him, he says, go to a certain town, look for a person by the name of Goldberg, and he'll tell you why you're not successful in business. And and he says, yeah, all right, that's pretty cryptic, but yeah, I guess I'll try it. So he goes, and for back in those days, right, it's not like you hop on a bus, to the next town, and if you didn't, have a car. It's, if there was wagons, and he was poor, he didn't have any money, so he had to walk for 3 days to get to this town. Hitch a ride whenever he could. So he gets into this town, and he goes and he starts asking around. He says, do you know a person by the name of, Mr. Goldberg? So they're like, nobody here by the name of, so he starts going to the synagogue. He says, let me go from synagogue to synagogue, see, that maybe they know a congregant. He goes from synagogue to synagogue. Do you know this guy, Yidel Goldberg? Do you know this guy, Yidel Goldberg? And nobody knows who he's talking about. He says, there's no person in this town by the name of Yidel Goldberg. So then he goes, and one of the people said, listen, maybe he's like a free thinker. He doesn't go to shul. He doesn't go to synagogue. So he starts asking around people on the street, do you know that for 3 days he's sitting and walking around asking people, do you know this person by the name of Yidel Goldberg? Nobody knows anything. Finally somebody says, you know what, why don't you go and try maybe he converted to Christianity, go try the priest. He goes to the priest, a guy by the name of, Yidel Goldberg, and the priest says, nobody converted, by that name in all our records. So the guy's like, the rabbi sent me on a goose chase for nothing. This is like, I'm not gaining anything over here. So he starts, he's exhausted, 3 days of nonstop, pursuing. So he's like, listen, I need a rest. He didn't have enough money to go and go stay at an inn. So he says, you know what, where is it usually quiet? A cemetery. Right? No one usually bothers anybody over there. So he says he goes and he sees a nice shady tree by the cemetery, and he goes to sleep over there. He figured he'll take a little nap, and then he'll start making his way back. He fell into a deep sleep, and he ended up waking up only the next morning. The next morning he wakes up, and he sees somebody standing over him, right, with a shovel. So nonetheless, so the guy says, is everything all right? And he's like, yeah, I'm fine. got a pulse. No need, put the shovel down, right? And the guy says, no. I'm the caretaker over here. He says, I saw you come last night exhausted. I saw you fell asleep. I figured, all right, I'll probably, you're probably, weary from your travels. I figured I'll come check on you in the morning. And I see you're still here. So he says, everything okay? So he says, yeah, the big rabbi or the Baal Shem Tov, he sent me over here to look for the guy named Yidel Goldberg, and I was 3 days over here and I couldn't find him and I was exhausted, so I apologize. I fell asleep more than I intended to. And the guy says, Yidel Goldberg? The grave digger said. So he's like, he says, yeah, well, you know him? So he's like, yeah, I know him. It's like, why would you want Yidel Goldberg though? He says, the rabbi said I have to go to meet Yidel Goldberg and he'll answer the questions to my problem. So this caretaker says, listen, I don't know how this guy's going to answer your problem, but I could bring you to him. So he's like, oh, that's amazing. He says, please. So they start walking through this graveyard, and they go to the far end of the graveyard, and he comes to this really dirty grave, and he starts pushing away all the leaves. And over there it says Yidel Goldberg, died about close to 100 years before the date that they were there, like in the 1630s or something they died. So, and he's like, here, Yidel Goldberg, here you go. And they're like, what am I supposed to do with a guy who's dead? How am I supposed to figure out how my problem is? And the caretaker says, listen, I don't know why, even if this guy was alive, I don't know how he could help you. This guy is, he was buried far out from away from everybody else. This guy was a very wicked person. He says, the only reason why I know this is because my father was a grave digger, and his father was a caretaker. Everybody was, and it was passed down generation to generation, his story. And he was a person that was a very big miser. He had a lot of money, but he was so stingy that he wouldn't even get married because then he would have to pay for his kids and wife and stuff. So he did not give money to anybody. He hoarded everything, and then he died. And besides that, he was evil. He did a lot of bad things with his money, and he didn't give out to anybody. So this guy Sam is like, well, what did the rabbi do? Come on, 3 days. It's been already 6 days. I'm exhausted to see this dead guy. No, this dead guy was a wicked guy. So he goes and he starts walking his way back to his hometown, and he figures, on the way was the rabbi's town. He says, listen, let me go ask him. He says, it doesn't make sense. This rabbi's a holy man. It doesn't send you on a goose chase. So he goes back to the rabbi, and he goes to the Baal Shem Tov and says, listen, I went, I couldn't find him for 3 days. Finally, I found him. He's a dead man. He says, why do you send me to a dead man? So the rabbi looks at him and says, listen, you're a smart man. He says, when does the day of death? So he says the date of death was whatever, 1630. And he's like, yeah. He's like, and when were you born? And then suddenly he starts freezing for a second, and he's like, the rabbi's like, can you put the two and two together? And the guy's like, are you telling me that I just visited my previous grave? And the rabbi says, yes. And now you have the answer to your question. And he leaves. So the guy's like, first of all, he's flipping out. He's like, imagine you're going and you see your grave where you were in a previous life. Right? How crazy is that? How crazy, people will snap, right? He says, and he started thinking, he says, listen, what was I in the previous life? I was a stingy man. He says, that's why God gave me, he was a smart man, he said, that's why God didn't give me any money, because last time I messed up with money. Now that my punishment is that I'm not going to get any money. So he said, listen, now I know, he knew how to do repentance. He started repenting. He says, listen, any money that he had, he would start giving away. He started opening his house to all the guest people, to all guests. He started doing everything that he did wrong in the previous life, he started doing correct in this life. And slowly but surely, his business started turning around and became extremely wealthy and extremely successful. The idea is that everybody has to know what they're here in this world for. And and we'll finish it with this idea. Whatever is hard in your life, whatever is very difficult for you, you should know that that's one of your main reasons that you're here. Right? One of the main reasons that you're here, though, if let's say somebody has a really hard time with non-kosher food, you could be self-assured that in a previous life you had a very hard time with kosher food or whatever, it was not kosher food, and now your job is to overcome it. Not the other way around. Okay, I'll work on something else, but this is too hard for me. People, unfortunately, the way that they pick on what they work on spiritually is they'll do the easy thing first, and the hard things they're not going to do because they can't deal with it, right? And I see it all the time. Like for people, let's say that I have a hard time keeping Shabbat, right? So the guy, they'll tell me, okay, I'll put on tefillin. And he puts on tefillin without a problem. I'm like, but your main reason that you're here is because you messed up on Shabbat. You got to keep Shabbat. That's your thing. Do the hardest thing it is for you to do. That's how you know that you have that's your purpose, right? Woman is very easy. Woman, you should know that one of the main reasons across the board is modesty. Modesty is very, very difficult. Nowadays, compared to what you had in like 100 years ago, modesty, what was modesty back then? Well, modesty back then would be a long skirt, that looked like you put a blanket with tied with a rope, right? And maybe some sandals or something like that, right? What was modesty? Everybody back then, the non-Jews were modest back then, right? But nowadays you see that the number one hardest thing for any woman is, no matter how the religious affiliation is, modesty is an extremely hard thing. That's why also on the flip side on men, Men also have the same thing with guarding their eyes. Guarding their eyes is also very, very difficult nowadays. They work hand in hand, obviously. So, whatever it is the hardest thing for you to do, that's what you need to work on. Now, God's giving you a do-over. God's giving you, he said, listen, I'm giving you another chance. Don't mess it up. Don't mess it up. This is what you have to do. Now, if somebody has a brain in their head, they realize, listen, I'm here and I have to do something. So you start start looking into yourself and start saying what it is that I need to fix, to know that you don't have to come back to this world again, right? Nobody wants to come back to this world again, right? This world is a very difficult place to be, both spiritually and physically, right? Obviously, you can enjoy it, and once you're here, you should, do as much as you can. But to come back over here, you have more of a chance of sinning than that's why there's 356 negative commandments, 248 positive commandments. But the idea is, and we'll continue with this, God willing, next class. But the idea is everybody has to look inside themselves and realize why they're here in this world, right? And if it's something, it's a blanket fresh to Judaism, then you got to start keeping Shabbat, kosher, and modesty, right? Top three things for women, you could say easily: Shabbat, kosher, and modesty, right? After that, you start building up. Anyways, any questions?
Okay, so you said to start by looking at what is the hardest thing for you in your life, what do you struggle with the most? Should it be just what's the things that are spiritual, or can it also be something that's not obviously?
So let's say somebody has character trait faults. That's also, you have to fix character trait faults. Where the Vilna Gaon said that one of the purposes of you being here is to fix tikkun midot, which means if somebody's angry, you have to work on yourself on not being angry. If someone's lazy, you have to work on yourself on not being lazy. If someone's very arrogant, you have to work on yourself in that. So every character trait is also have to be, besides the mitzvot and the Torah, that's one part. But the other part is you have to fix yourself to become a good person. Right. The easy way to do it is the Torah. That's what the whole purpose is. The Torah is, there's a reason for it. It's not like, shake some fruit. And there's a reason for everything. There's a reason for everything. It makes you a better person.
So let's say someone is extremely disorganized. That's not really something that's clearly ben adam l'chavero. So could it be part of his tikkun to fix that? Or
if it affects, so that's already splitting here. So the question is does it affect the spiritual? If let's say someone's not organized and because of that they come into Shabbat really late. Right. So that's a problem. That's a problem. You have to do it. But if someone's not organized, and because when they're on their computer desk, they have on their desktop, they have folders everywhere, right? But it's not going to change anything that you do ever in the spiritual sense. Probably not, right? And generally, it's good to be organized. It's good to be neat. It's good to be, there was once a big rabbi that went once to he wanted to visit his son in a faraway yeshiva, but he never saw him. How did he check up on him? He went to see how his bed was made, where his slippers were, and if his bed was made neat and his slippers were neatly, he knew that he's doing okay. Right, emotionally at least. So, obviously you should try to fix on everything that you can, but always focus on the things that you know. There's somebody, let's say, who's disorganized, and then they have a problem of anger. They get angry. Somebody cuts them off, forget about it. They're lucky they don't have a license to carry, right? Because there would be dead people everywhere, right? That type of person has to, for his main focus, you have to work on everything. The main focus is you got to work on the anger, right? Anger is a very, very hard trait, especially if to get married with somebody who has anger issues is a very, very anger, stingy is a very, very hard character traits. And if anybody there's certain character traits that people need to know that they need to work on in order to have a successful relationship. There are certain basic human character traits that have to be perfected. The more perfected you are, the better of a marriage that you'll have, the better of a relationship that you'll have, both with your spouse and with God. Any other questions? Yes.
So earlier you were talking about dreams and deja vu and stuff like that. So if a person has a lot of very prominent deja vu, does that mean something?
You can't. No, you can't.
Often.
You mean is it as a sign?
I don't know. Is it bad or is it?
Oh no.
Something.
No, that's not.
Is that abnormal?
No. Some people are more. For example, some people remember dreams. Some people don't. Right? There's a lot to speak about that idea itself, but there's some people that there's some people also that live life very spaced out. They walk through the life basically just like ADD throughout the entire life, right? And there are many people that are very perceptive to everything. So both of them are happening the same things, but one of them is not realizing, and one's more perceptive. Mm-hmm. So it's very possible that people are more perceptive to the deja vu, and that's why they're getting it more, or that's why they feel like they're getting it more, as opposed to somebody else who just whatever, too much movies are in their mind and they can't even put the two and two together. By the way, movies fry your brain also, not just marijuana.
Oh no.
All right, that's it.
Thank you.
Okay, Chazak u'baruch.